others too. Okay, so I will call to order this portion of our meeting today on April 14th. And we are now in the open meeting. It's 2:01 p.m. And I want to recognize, although we did this earlier, I want to recognize that we are today operating the District of Tofino in the traditional territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, and that council members are also calling in from Coast Salish territories on the east coast of the Vancouver Island, and acknowledge that. And just let everybody know, excuse me, that we are recording this Zoom call council meeting, and so we will be posting that as we normally do, but just so that everybody is aware. And I just have a short statement here to just acknowledge a couple of things as we get going here. And first of all, just to welcome those members of the public that are joining us by Zoom. It's good to have you here and able to watch us in this time of the COVID pandemic, be able to conduct a meeting online. And so thank you. People who enter the meeting, so members of the public, you have automatically been muted, and we do ask that you stay on mute during the meeting. The video function is not enabled, so we want you to please just remain mute and leave the video function off for now. We are looking at ways that the public comment and question period can be reopened and be, again, equally accessible to the public. Those fundamental principles of democracy, of public participation at the right points are very important to us at the District of Tofino and to me, Mayor, and our council. So our staff is looking into that. And in the meantime, we are still accepting delegations. We will have a delegation today, so people will see how that runs. And correspondence, we have a number of items on our meeting agenda today that are typical letters that we do get, and we still do accept those. And so we'll provide some more opportunities in the future for how we can do this on Zoom. So I would ask then, in order for us to be able to conduct a council meeting in which we are able to focus our attention, that we not be distracted and have anybody enter the meeting partway through to ask any questions by unmuting themselves. If you do unmute yourselves and if there are disruptions, we are able to mute you. And then if ultimately those requests are not adhered to, we do have the ability to kick you out, and we really don't want to do that. So thank you very much for your participation. And if you encounter any technical difficulties as you're watching council's meeting today, please feel free to use the information that helped you get onto Zoom to look for the telephone number, and instead you can call in and you will be able to hear us, although you will not be able to see us. All right, so with that, council will move into our regular session part where we adopt the minutes. And so first of all, we have some minutes from the regular council meeting that was held on March 10th for adoption.
I'll move that the minutes of the regular council meeting held March 10th be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. So moved and seconded. Were there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Okay, seeing none. Would you raise your hand if all in favor? Thank you. None opposed. The motion is carried. And then we had minutes from the special council meeting that was held on March 16th, 2020.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Were there any errors or omissions noted in those minutes? No? Okay. So all in favor? I see hands. And Councillor McMaster? I'm assuming yes, but Councillor McMaster, I'll say any opposed? Seeing none, then the motion is carried. So Councillor McMaster, we cannot see you right now. All right, then we'll move into the mayor's report. I don't have a formal mayor's report today, but I do want to say that clearly we are in unprecedented times, a phrase that has been used a lot lately. And I really want to take the opportunity to thank every member of our community and our region for the tremendous amount of support and community spirit that's really been shown at a time that is incredibly difficult. From everywhere from first responders to essential workers, our staff at the District of Tofino, members of council, the business community that has responded in a way that supports our social responsibilities in this time. It's unprecedented, absolutely. And I want to say on behalf of Mayor and Council to everybody watching and to the rest of the community at large, thank you so much for all of the support. And we are going to be talking about some really important topics today in our meeting around recovery and resiliency. And I am really proud to be able to be helping to lead this community at a time when I know that all of our creativity and passion will be put towards how we can support each other and see a way through in recovering from what's taking place. So thank you, everybody. We are then going to move into our correspondence section, and we have a series of letters before us, some all focused on some of the same topics, so we don't need to treat each letter individually, but we will just run through them. And if any member of council has a comment or a statement you want to make about any of the letters or questions, then please just let us know. So first, we have a letter from local resident Kyle Meager regarding a request for resources for a COVID-19 local recovery plan. And that is a topic that we will be discussing today in our meeting. Did any member of council have a question or comment about that letter? Okay, seeing none. We then have a letter from Mr. Midgley and Ms. Remington, and we have a letter from Mike Dauphiny, a letter from Catherine Bruweiler, Jay Lazar, Tim Hackett, and these letters are all of a similar nature in calling for consideration of the budget, the District of Tofino's budget and financial plan, and the impacts that it's having on property taxpayers and on the community at large. And of course, I am happy to say, as the District of Tofino has put out a statement and a release really about the fact that we are taking a very detailed look at this year's budget as well as our 2020 to 2024 financial plan, with many things in mind, from keeping essential services running so that the town can as quickly as possible recover from what's happening, and in addition looking at the impacts particularly in this year on people's ability to pay and what they are going to pay. And that as a municipality that needs to continue running, that there are certain interests that we have in mind as well that we are discussing and will soon be communicating a lot more with the public about. Did any member of council have any particular questions that came out of any of these letters? Seeing and shaking heads. Okay, thank you very much. So next we'll move on. We have a letter from the COVID-19 Active Fishermen's Committee regarding protocols for fisheries interactions with coastal communities. So I very much appreciated to see their draft protocols for COVID-19 protection measures. Did any member of council have any questions or comments? No? Okay, terrific. We have a letter from the City of New Westminster regarding the National Pharmacare Program. Any comments there? Nope. All right, and then last but not least, we do have correspondence from the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust regarding the Board of Directors appointment. So currently, Kathy Fick is the director who has been appointed by our municipal council to serve on the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust Board, and she is reaching the end of her second 4-year term. And we, in addition to the rest of the CBT board, are really grateful for Kathy's service. And now it is time for the municipality to begin a process to identify a new community member who could be appointed to the CBT. So typically what we've done in the past is run a recruitment process, not unlike the way we do for our municipal committees. And maybe I would just pass this over to Elise or somebody from our staff who could speak to what we will do next with this.
Sure. I don't have my video on, but I will just say that the CBT is just looking to plant the seed in council's mind about advertising for a new board member to represent the District of Tofino, and it doesn't have to, nothing has to be done at this meeting except to think about who you might want to represent the district, and as staff we will begin to advertise in conjunction with the CBT to help solicit some nominations from the community, and then those will come forward to council. Council can also bring forward its own nominee if there is someone that you would like to nominate and discuss amongst yourselves. So at this time there's no action requested other than thinking about who you might want to appoint to that seat and asking any questions of the CBT that you might have.
Great. Okay, thank you. So at least that means the staff, you will run the recruitment process, and then council will have the opportunity to discuss that.
That's correct.
Good. Does anybody have any questions about that? No? Okay. All right, good. So that ends the correspondence section of our agenda, and we'll move on to presentations and reports. And the first, in the amazing age of technology that we are in, we have Mike Pearson and Darren England from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to talk about Highway 4 and the Kennedy Hill project update that they have for us. So we are going to turn it over to them, and they have up to 15 minutes to make their presentation. And then, as we would normally in the council chambers, have the opportunity for members of council to ask any questions that we have. So over to somebody who is going to perform the technological magic here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think we can just share our screen here. Oh, good afternoon. Thanks for having us today at the council meeting. We have a presentation here, and if you just can bear with me for a second, I will get it going here. Right. So thank you again for having us today to talk about the Kennedy Hill Safety Project and give you a bit of an update. Just to give you a bit of background, this was initially planned after we had the extended closure back in January, and then the subsequent follow-up 24-hour closure in February to put in the temporary bridge structure. After that January closure, that's when we began a sort of a review of our schedule and how the project was progressing. So initially we'd hoped to be able to present to council back in March, but then with everything that's happened in the last month, we just haven't been able to. So thank you for accommodating us virtually today. And with that, I'll pass it over to Darren to speak to the project.
Thanks, and sorry to interrupt you, Mike and Darren, but we can see a screen, but it just had sort of white with a few words on it. Is it a presentation we're supposed to be seeing right now?
Oh, yeah.
It says group share video conferencing.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Hi, Mike, this is Elise. You can just choose a different pane of your screen to share. So if you have multiple windows open, you can choose from among those windows.
Let's try that one. How's that?
Hey, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's good. Yeah, everyone hopefully can hear me. My name is Darren England. I'm the project manager for overseeing Kennedy Hill Safety Improvements Project. And the first slide here is just an image of the current condition of the project. So this drone imagery was taken in March. Actually, yeah, very early March. Go to the next slide here. So I'll kind of run through a very high-level kind of refresher of the scope and the overall intent to this project. Is that the project's located, as we know, on Kennedy Hill. It's a 1.5 kilometer long section of highway improvement, with the primary focus being on widening the existing lanes and adding paved shoulders that are basically were non-existent before the project started, as well as improving barrier and roadside protection and providing for basically a ditch, even a basic sense on the rocks that are mountainside of the highway. That ditch will also be utilized for rock catchment, and there's going to be an extensive amount of rock stabilization work completed under the project to mitigate rockfall and contain rockfall. The other aspect of the project is utilizing the surplus rock that otherwise would be just disposed of. We're utilizing that in an embankment area that allow for a rest area to be a viewpoint to be provided for under the project. The budget was $38.1 million and still remains at that. Contract was awarded to Emil Anderson in the beginning of 2018 for a $29 million contract award value. So very unique things on this project are its constraints. We've very few, if next to none, in the province that are as complex as this one for the site constraints. As everyone is aware, we've got a very high mountain cut on one side, a lake on the other, a very narrow highway to begin with to facilitate access and construction management. And we also have the hydro transmission lines, which are the sole power feed to the west coast. So our whole method of removing the rock on this project is a very methodical one, and the focus first and foremost obviously is on that safety, public and worker safety, but second to that is really trying to mitigate impact to this critical infrastructure, the hydro lines. A big aspect of any blasting operation is fly rock, and we're pursuing very controlled, very small blasts compared to other highway projects, and we're utilizing a system called stemming, which basically we fill the top of every single drill hole with a small amount of gravel to retain the explosive gases. That'll make more sense in the next slides when I describe the magnitude of the volume of earthwork that we're doing on this project. So some of the other challenges that we have is like I said, the access. And this isn't like a normal highway cut where we can, pioneer a road up there and use machines for all of it. There's a substantial amount of blasting on this project that is done by hand drilling. That is scalers rappelling off the rocks and actually having handheld drill rigs in their hands, drilling holes for the blast materials. It's a very monotonous, slow-going process, and that goes to the point of having small blasts. It's retains the risk, but also it allows for a very controlled removal of the mountainside here. And in the image here, you can see the kind of the scale and associated with each of those red or yellow circles. Rather have kind of the hard hat wearing scalers hanging off ropes there in the image, so it gives you some context to scale. Other challenges that we've seen materialize into prolonged road closures. A lot of it's to do with the scaling of large blocks and unstable materials. So on the right image there, you can see some areas circled in yellow where you can see what I refer to as a slip plane. It's a very smooth kind of area of exposed rock. Prior to the blasts dislodging those materials, those areas were rock that in some cases were bolted in place from 1960s eras and 80s eras rock bolts. So we have to go through a very controlled process to remove those. With all our best efforts and dislodging those in a planned event and having the specific blast take down a specific rock, sometimes the rocks don't perform the way we want to. And two types of incidents have occurred where a block comes down when it wasn't envisioned to come down with a blast in the vicinity. The other type is where the blast intended to take the rock down, but the rock didn't fully dislodge. And so in those conditions, we have to bring the scalers back up. We have to have a response with equipment and personnel, and typically results in a prolonged opening window. So those are definitely some of the bigger challenges that relate to traffic management on the site of those type of blocks. The other challenges we've had were the two isolated kind of incidents we've had. One of them, obviously, the bin wall collapse that happened in January there with the large block dislodging and impacting the highway. Obviously, the subsequent deployment of a temporary bridge that was ultimately removed from the site in the end of February there, so that we could put a permanent slope repair in place so that we could continue blasting above. In the image on the left there, you can see that area of that's call it permanent slope repair. In this area, though, the permanent highway alignment will actually be in the rock, fully inset into the rock there. So that repair is permanent through construction, but actually is temporary in the sense of the ultimate life of the highway. On the right-hand side is another image of some conditions we found with corduroy road. That's a type of road construction used by the forest industry, where basically they lay logs under the road embankment to support fill. We've encountered that in a couple areas now, and this photo is from last year in one area that was in the north embankment. You'll see images later and a video later of that status, but we just recently found one last week, so it's still something that periodically pokes its head out where we dig an excavation and find some logs going underneath the highway. So those are some areas where we're having to change focus on excavations and adjust to the challenges on site. With the kind of the current status of things, first run through some of the stats for the magnitude of the earthworks. So construction began just early summer of 2018, so a little under 2 years ago. We're currently sitting at 60% complete by the metrics of volume and expenditure on the project. One thing I'll comment on that 60% though is that this summer the expenditures will increase, so that percentage of completion will actually be increasing more rapidly than it otherwise would have in the last 2 years, just because of the amount of work that we're able to now start tackling later this summer. Blasting is an ongoing operation daily. Blasts basically almost any given work day there's a blast going off. We've got a 24-hour site presence with the single lane alternating traffic, so there's always crew there present on site. And currently we're just undertaking a day shift with recent changes on site, but we're going to be going back to a night shift again, so a 24-hour operation day and night shift again in the coming weeks here. There's over 120,000 cubic meters of blast rock, which is equivalent of 30,000 dump truck loads on site. Just moved around. And in addition to that 120,000, there's also 35,000 cubic meters of just soil. So that would be your organics and your gravels that are naturally occurring out there. That's equivalent of 6,000 truckloads. So it's still to go. We've got 46,000 cubic meters in the primary bluffs that are fully benched now and just need to come down to highway grade, and on a further 15,000 cubic meters of soil, which generally resides under the existing highway where it's being lowered. Now, some details around the blasts involved. There's been over 430 blasts to date on the project. By the volume of earth blasted, that's on average of under 300 cubic meters per blast. Now, in context, average highway construction projects on Vancouver Island, like the Highway 1 project, or even the active project down in Langford right now, blasts on those projects are typically between 1,000 and 2,000 cubic meters. So we're less than a third of, in most cases, less than even a sixth of the size of those blasts. Again, relating to the challenges and access and the restrictions we have on the site, making sure everything's very controlled and methodically blasted. Each blast takes over 150 meters of drilling. That's 30 to 40 holes per blast. So in overall, all the blasts, there's over 9 kilometers of drilling done by hand and over 54 kilometers of drilling done by machine to date. That's over 100,000 kilograms of explosives. And we've also installed over 800 meters of steel piles in a wall. You can see that on the top right photo there. That's what's left of those visible, I guess you'd say, of those piles is a pile cap that's being formed there. That's a slope stability system that is retaining the highway in that area from seismic events. So this is all meeting seismic codes for highway stability. And then we're also putting in, we have numerous rock bolts all over the rock faces. There's over 1 kilometer of those bolts getting installed. Big change that happened midway through construction was an evaluation by our contractor in providing a alternative design that could achieve the intents of our project, but do it with less rock removal and inherently less risk because of that removal and reduction in cut. So what we're introducing now is the reduction of 130,000 cubic meters of rock by basically not going as far into the mountainside, but by not going as far in the mountainside, we have to accommodate some of the widening on the lakeside via 4 cantilever bridge structures. I'll show a video in a second here, but on the top right image there, you'll see dark black sections of the highway. Those represent 4 of the 4 locations where the short cantilevers will go in. They effectively span the, say at least 1 lane of the highway and the shoulder, or should say at most 1 lane of the highway and the shoulder of the highway, where the where the eastbound lane going up the hill is founded on bedrock. But those areas are utilized in order to reduce the cut into the mountainside by, maybe only in the meter wide, but that illustrates or correlates to 130,000 cubic meters of rock, and so it's a substantial volume change on the earthworks. We're able to also save about 3 hectares of dense older growth forest that's located just in the image on the bottom there where the word rest is in rest area. There's a large footprint of trees that otherwise would have been clear cut last year to accommodate the alignment. So we've shifted the alignment slightly at the top of the hill to account for our reduced volume of rock that's coming out of the cuts. And then we're also now able to achieve the rest area on the lake side of the highway. So that provides for a basically a more aesthetically pleasing view, and as well as access for anyone not wanting to take their photograph or not. It reduces or eliminates the risk of someone walking across the highway, which was previously raised at the open house 2 years ago. So the next one here, Mike, if you can put up the video. Bear with us while we change presentations here. Might need to go stop video and then go back to the other one. It's, that's the first time presenting on Zoom for us as well, so it's
we'll just do that at the end.
What you could do if you do stop sharing or stop and then redo it, but we can finish this presentation and then go through if you want. Okay, yeah. Hopefully everyone can see this. I'll speak over the video as it's playing through here. So this is drone imagery taking of the site. So this is looking from the top of the hill down. You can see the bulldozers working there over the new alignment grade. That's the new embankment midway through there, and the old highway snaking its way through. There's now a through cut at the top of the hill where the alignment is now shifted inland. And then to the right there, that's the new rest area footprint, just underneath those hydro wires there. As we come around this curve here, just on the left of the, oh, sorry. So this is the rest area footprint, the large fill that's near the summit of the hill. And just in the foreground there is the start of the slope stability wall. So you can play there, it'll keep panning forward. Yeah, we had to merge 2 videos there to kind of get a single fly through. So on the left there, you'll see the old highway, and then that what looks like a large gray kind of a brown color alignment there. That's the steel of the pile wall that goes along that area. So that'll be the outer edge of the new highway. And from this point down the hill, this is where the new cantilevers started coming into play. So I'll get Mike to hit pause right about now. So going down the rest of the hill, call it the apex of each of those insets where there's a large slope going down to the lake. The very crest of that existing bedrock mountain slope on the lake side of the highway will get a small, relatively small in terms of bridges, but a small cantilever structure that will hold the outer edge of the highway. So these bridges are built to full highway standards, seismic standards. They're no different than any other structure we've crossed, but they're unique in the sense that they don't just span a void. They actually have an abutment running down the center line of the highway. So they were formerly used on the Sea to Sky Highway project, and they're also being used on the Highway 1 corridor to the Highway 1 Alberta, Highway 1 corridor to Alberta. So this is the first time on Vancouver Island that we're utilizing these type of structures. Very unique type of bridge in their engineering, but are very useful for this exact benefit of able to mitigate substantial volume of rock excavations. So in the video on the right, you can see this the kind of finished where the trucks are parked. There is a finished shear line, but where there's the little tote road going up to the hill, that's the bluff where the excavators are working there. That's a bluff that still has to come down. That'll be the last bluff. That's the kind of the biggest bluff and the most volume of rock still to come out on that one. This lowest bluff is effectively done now as well. Now this video, well, Mike goes back to the last 2 slides on the kind of presentation. This video will be available through Flickr shortly. We're just looking at getting that posted, so we'll be able to send out that link. So going forward here, the key milestone that we're we're all looking forward to is reduced traffic impacts. And where that will come into play is for this July, we're working towards getting that bluff I was just referring to in the video, getting that one down to highway grade. Once we have these bluffs down to highway grade, the closure windows that we see, the 2 to the 3 hour closures, the 4 hour currently happening now, we don't need that duration of closure to achieve the blasting and ultimate removal of the rock, because the blasting that's going to happen after that point is actually below the existing highway grade. It's lowering the grade. So it'd be much like what we undertake on the Malahat or even in Langford currently with blasting that only needs a 15-20 minute closure for the blast, push the debris aside, and then traffic can get going again. So we're definitely looking forward to that for the what may become peak flows or volumes in this summer. Obviously, with the pandemic active right now, it's uncertain of what we'll see for traffic volumes. But nonetheless, we want to be in a position to not have those closures of that duration in the summer. Then the cantilever bridges will be starting very shortly. The materials are on site. We've got a lot of the deck panels sitting there. Other components are ready to start going towards those structures. And the bridge work operations, when we undertake those bridges through this summer, they're located in an area that's kind of over existing voids, if you will. So they don't actually drastically impact or really impact the traffic at all. The traffic will be pushed into the new widened area while those bridges are being built. So again, low impact traffic management wise. And we're looking to do some paving on the north alignment, the north limits. So that's the Port Alberni into the site, doing some paving in the near future here, and then the balance of the paving late this fall. So original completion date, as everyone was aware, was in summer of 2020. So what that was envisioned was kind of finishing up the final barrier installs and the finishing touches kind of in the September kind of window. That has slid, and as we a news release went out, I believe 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, for the kind of ultimate adjustment in schedule here. We're working towards the final paving being in late fall, so late fall, October, November period of this 2020, and then total completion this winter. As it's said on the screen here, this is prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, our contractor has only really been impacted for a couple weeks on site with the initial activities that happened, but the schedule and the contractor, they're going to be getting their crew back on for the night shift and then maintaining the schedule. So we're hoping that the effects of the pandemic are going to be relatively minimal, but that's still to be fully determined. So yeah, and kind of closing it out with any questions that any of the Mayor or Council you might have.
Great, thank you very much, Darren, and thank you, Mike. Thank you for your communication all along during the project, and I also want to say thank you very much for being really responsive to some of the questions we had around the COVID pandemic and the practices that the crews are using out at the site, and your ability as the ministry to be able to change some of the overhead messaging on the signs. That's been a real help for the West Coast. Does anyone from Council have a question for Darren or Mike about the project? Well, it must have been a really impressive video and a very detailed summary of, I want to know how many Olympic-sized swimming pools of rock does this all count up to, Darren?
I have to do the equation, but it's a common question we get about trying to orientate cubic meters of material into something that people can relate to. So we use dump trucks this time around instead of swimming pools.
That's great. Okay, well, we really appreciate the update, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to move on in our agenda, and our next item is a report coming to us from our staff on a development variance permit application from the Tofino Bible Fellowship at 1129 Abraham Drive. And did our staff have any comments they wanted to lead off with?
Sure. Hello, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me?
Peter Thick.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I do have a a PowerPoint presentation that I'll try to run through quickly here, just in an effort to kind of orientate everybody as to this particular application. So hopefully everybody can see this. What I'm looking at right now is the opening slide of a PowerPoint presentation for a development variance permit for 1129 Abraham Drive. This is the applicants are the Tofino Bible Fellowship. And we'll keep moving through it. All right, can everybody see and hear all right? Sounds
Yeah.
all right. Okay, thanks very much. So basically what we're looking at is varying the District of Tofino zoning bylaw. The variance is to reduce the minimum required rear, side, and front yard setbacks. So this is for a single family dwelling in the RA1 zone. The purpose or the reason this variance was requested was to allow for some flexibility in future siting of potential dwellings. So the Tofino Bible Fellowship is hoping to be able to provide, one of their mandates is to provide affordable housing for people here in Tofino. And in order to do that, they would like to eventually rezone this property or have something go on with the property that would allow even more dwellings on the property to expand that program. So they would like to site the initial 2 dwellings in a way that would allow them to have a bit more flexibility with siting potentially in the future. So the location of the property is here at 1129 Abraham Drive. Just kind of between Fellowship and Parley Place. One thing that I'd like to point out is just to the north of the property is kind of a designated parkland area. I believe that was originally given up during the subdivision of Abraham Drive area some 20 years ago or 25 years ago or so. There is actually a small stream that runs through that area there. So it's actually not marked as a development permit area on any of our maps. However, it would be considered for protection under the same development permit area regulations. So even though this isn't really a part of the development variance permit, it may be something that needs to be addressed at building permit stage. We haven't actually had an official survey of exactly how far the creek is from where they want to site the building, but it may be something that comes up at building permit. So I just want to keep council aware of that. So this is, we're looking at the kind of the sketch, the rough siting for where the 2 units will be located. So along the north property line, there's a 3-bedroom unit, and the closer to the south property line, a 2-bedroom unit. Currently, there's a double-wide trailer on the lot that is going to be removed. My understanding is basically within the RA1 zoning, the larger 3-bedroom unit is going to act as the primary dwelling, and then the 2-bedroom unit will be considered the caretaker's cabin. However, they'll both be intended for long-term rental use. I think it's also important to note that we don't have any legal confirmation from the Tofino Bible Fellowship that this is what they're intending to do. It is, kind of part of their mandate as an organization. However, the typical development rights that they have for a residential property still apply. And what that means is if they wanted to, for example, rent the smaller 2-bedroom unit long-term and then short-term rental the larger 3-bedroom unit, we don't actually have any ability to not allow them to do that. However, what their stated intention is to use both these for long-term affordable rentals. So a couple pictures here of the property. I went out and did a quick site visit. The picture on the left there kind of shows, well, both pictures, you can see the existing unit on the property that's going to be removed. If you can imagine, kind of 2 new units on there, they'd be basically spinning the existing unit 90 degrees to sort of face the driveway, face the angle that the camera's taken from, or so, pardon me, the picture's taken from. One would be on the left side of the image and one would be far on the right side of the image. My understanding from looking at approximately where the pegs of the property are and what the survey that's been submitted shows, is that there shouldn't need to be any more clearing than what's been shown. But the picture on the right there shows where there has been some vegetation removed, and that's approximately where the larger unit would be sitting. So going through some of the criteria we use to evaluate these applications, regarding the form and character of the neighborhood, generally they're in line with the size and character of other properties on the street. It's a residential neighborhood. This is a residential property. It's quite common for properties around the area to have sort of a small cabin as well as a primary dwelling. Regarding the sort of ecological functioning and natural features, there has been some clearing already happened. My understanding is that more clearing should not be necessary. However, there is a little bit of a question about the development permit area related to the riparian zone to the north of the lot. So that may be something that comes up at the building permit stage. Currently, at the moment, I've kind of done some very basic kind of mapping using our GIS, trying to understand where their lot is in comparison to that creek. And it appears to me that it is within the development permit area. However, at building permit stage, they will probably ask for an updated survey that maybe can indicate the exact distance to the center of the stream, which is how we used to kind of determine these development permit areas. And at that point, determine whether a development permit will be necessary. So solar exposure, again, is roughly equal across the property. With respect to privacy, there's definitely, fairly, like, things have been cleared fairly close to the lot line to the south there. However, there is still a regular buffer of trees. And so when I visited the site, it didn't seem that there would be much intrusion onto the neighboring property's privacy, particularly as these buildings are, I think, about 14 feet in height. So they're only one story. So they shouldn't be popping up and looking into anybody's yard or anything like that. Regarding views, shouldn't be any changes from this variance. And then regarding building design, the design of the building is, these are prefabricated models. So the design is kind of what the design is. It's not anticipated that the actual design of the building will be impacted by the variance very much. However, there may be, with siting and things like that, there will be some minor changes. And comments were solicited from neighbors through the notification process. So notification went out twice, once on March 13th and second time on April 3rd. That was due to the canceled council meeting. We did have one email come in, but it was mostly a clarification email. However, the one thing that the sender did note was that they were slightly concerned about the ability for fire crews or ambulance crews to access the property should there be not very much room around the setbacks. However, I then kind of proceeded to explain that there would still be plenty of room for parking and regular access to the lot. So we don't anticipate that to be an issue. So that was, we did receive an email, but it was more of an informative email. At this point, staff are recommending approval of the development variance permit. Other options would be to refuse the application or defer the application. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer.
Hey, thanks very much, Peter. Did anyone have any questions? Okay, just one quick question, Peter. In your language, talking around the stream, the possible requirement of a stream survey and the possible of intrusion into that setback area, you said kind of, sort of, but will they or will they not be required to do that at a point of building?
So they will be required to, if necessary. So the way our development permit areas work is that if something is planned within 30 meters of a riparian area, generally that's measured from the center of the stream. If something is planned within that, then they will require a development permit, which involves basically getting a report from a registered professional biologist to ensure that anything they're planning to do will not impact the riparian area or the ecological integrity of the area. At the moment, because this hasn't actually been officially surveyed and we don't have kind of defined lines for where the development permit area ends and where it starts and ends and how it interacts with the property, it's a little bit difficult at this point to confirm that. However, how that would work is at the building permit stage, we would ask for a survey from the applicants, and we would also then ask them to, while they're getting that survey happen, while that survey is happening or while it's being updated, we would then ask them to as well just ask the surveyor to do a measurement from where the stream is located to where the building is proposed to be. And at that point, we would be able to more accurately determine whether a development permit is needed. My sort of rough measurements based on our GIS put the side of the building at approximately 27 meters. So at the moment, I believe that there has been, or there probably likely will be a development permit necessary at building permit stage. And so this is something I'm going to be discussing with the applicant should the development variance permit application move forward. Okay,
thank you. So in that case, they would have the opportunity to reconsider if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's correct. So the development variance permit would give them the opportunity to site their building within the setback as required by the zoning bylaw. However, the development permit area is kind of, we currently house them within our OCP, so it's a different consideration for them as they work on the development. So if that is something that they no longer want to pursue, or they want to, move their building outside of that area, they're welcome to, and then they don't need to obtain that development permit. However, if they want to maintain the flexibility for the potential future expansion of their rental project, I think that they will likely need to cite the building as they have them proposed, and at that point, at this moment, it seems like they will be needing a development permit.
Okay, thanks. And then, not to belabor this, but just for my own understanding and curiosity, in a situation like this where it's not entirely clear, whose responsibility is it to prove that they are or are not in a development permit area? Is that the municipalities or the applicants, or is it shared somehow?
That's a good question. I actually, off the top of my head, don't know. Typically, how it would work is that we would receive, the applicant would apply for a building permit, and then we would receive a survey that indicates how far the property is from a side yard setback or its relationship to the nearby riparian area. In this case, because that riparian area hasn't been mapped, and because the survey that we've received from the applicant is a little bit old, I mean, it works for the purposes of communicating the point of the development variance, but it doesn't necessarily work for the purposes of a building permit or to determine whether a development permit is needed. So in this case, my initial response would be that the onus is on the applicant to prove they don't need a development permit, particularly when my hunch is that they do. However, if they can easily prove to staff satisfaction that they don't require a development permit, that the location of the building is going to be outside of the development permit area, then that's fine with me. But until that point, I would be hesitant to issue a building permit without a development permit, unless there's been some updated survey that kind of indicates that it won't be necessary.
Thank you very much.
Well,
anybody else have questions? No? All right. Turn your minds to the motion before us then.
I'll move the recommendation that council approve development variance permit number 0220 to vary District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 for lot 1 district lot 127 Tla-o-qui-aht District Plan VIP 62054 as follows. A, vary part 18.6.1 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 to reduce the minimum required front yard setback for a principal building in an RA1 zone from 12.2 meters, 40 feet to 6.1 meters, 20 feet as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 0220. B, vary part 18.6.2 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 to reduce the minimum required north side yard setback for principal building in an RA1 zone from 4.5 meters, 15 feet to 2.7 meters, 8.9 feet as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 0220, and vary parts 18.63 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 to reduce the minimum required rear yard setback for principal building in an RA1 zone from 9 meters 30 feet to 5.4 meters 17.7 feet as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 0220.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Thompson. All right, any final questions or discussion on that? Okay, is anybody opposed to the motion? Hearing none, everyone in favor of the motion, and the motion is carried. Thank you. I can't see everybody's faces, so I'll do it in the reverse like that. All right, thanks. We'll move on then to our next item, and that is the Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw, a report from our CFO, Nyla Tiana. And Nyla, do you have a little presentation, or are you just going to speak to it?
I'll just speak to it. I don't have a presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So today I am introducing a revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw to Council. This bylaw allows for the municipality to ensure stable cash flows for 2020 in anticipation of the collection of this year's property taxes. So due to the impact COVID-19 has had on the economy, staff are anticipating a reduction in the ability to pay. And as such, we're planning for likely a delay in complete or full property taxation. So what I am recommending is a line of credit essentially being put in place for up to $5 million to have access. And when that offset revenue is collected, the taxation revenue, we are required to repay any of that borrowing should it occur. So we are required in advance of collecting property taxation to pay all of the agency taxes. So that includes school tax, police tax, regional district taxes, in advance of the collection of tax revenue. So having this credit in place, it will allow us to meet those cash flow obligations. It'll allow us to continue with our operations, and it will allow us to continue to meet our debt servicing requirements that we currently have in place. So I am recommending that a borrowing bylaw be put in place for revenue anticipation in the amount of $5 million for 2020s. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyla. Did anybody have any questions about this?
Nyla, I have a question. How long would the borrowing bylaw stay in place? Does it automatically end after we pay it back and move into the next year?
So yeah, the borrowing bylaw would fall away once we have collected our revenue and we're able to repay, and then it will fall away. The challenge right now is, so under typical circumstances, this tool is available to municipalities every year. We haven't required it for many, many years. But typically when a municipality has one, the maximum you can put in place is 75% of what you expect to collect. And typically that amount is collected within the current year. What we may see is a significant delay in property tax collection, and that may move into next year. And I don't have any further comment on that at this time. It'll likely be discussions that we have with the ministry, because this is could potentially be longer term than it typically is.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay then. So before us, we have the bylaw and the recommendation to introduce and read a first, second, third time and to adopt. So would somebody read the motion?
I can read it. I recommend that the District of Tofino Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw number 1281/2020 be read a first, second, and third time, and that District of Tofino Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw number 1281/2020 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. So it is moved and seconded. Were there any final questions or comments on this? All right. Is anybody opposed to the motion?
I'd just like to comment that under the circumstances, it's the prudent thing to do. And that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. All right. I'll call again. Is anybody opposed to the motion? No, then all are in favor of the motion, and the motion is carried. Thank you very much. All right, our next report is the Traffic and Parking Regulation Amendment Bylaw. And Kira, hi Kira.
Hi Josie. All right, so I'll just share my screen here. And just, sorry, just give me one moment to move all of your wonderful faces out of the way of the report that I'm trying to read.
We can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, so this report is titled Traffic and Parking Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 1091/06. And the purpose of this report is to introduce for Council's consideration Bylaw number 1091/06, which amends the Traffic and Parking Regulation Bylaw 1091 by increasing parking rates within district paid parking lots as specified in Schedule B, and inserting an effective date of May 1st, 2020. The recommendation of this report is that District of Tofino Traffic and Parking Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 1091/06 2020 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time and be adopted. Effective April 16th, 2016, the Traffic and Parking Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 109103 was adopted to regulate district parking lots located at Lot 8, 9, 11, and 12, Block 6, Plan 717 of the municipal office lots from May 1st to September 30th annually. Effective June 1st, 2018, Amendment Bylaw number 109105 was adopted to increase parking rates and extend paid parking from May 1st to October 15th annually, resulting in an additional $17,000 of revenue in 2019 compared to 2017. The District of Tofino currently has 2 paid parking lots adjacent to the municipal office. Accessible from Campbell Street is the paved RV oversized vehicle paid parking lot, which has approximately 8 long RV spaces and 8 short RV spaces. Accessible from 3rd Street is the standard size vehicle paid parking, which has approximately 45 spaces. For this report, staff selected a range of municipalities throughout BC to survey in order to compare parking rates within paid lots. This included Kelowna, Lions Bay, Nanaimo, Vernon, Victoria, Whistler, and Harrison Hot Springs. All surveyed experience high rates of visitation and are located on waterfront with the exception of Whistler. Similar to Tofino, Nanaimo has long-term parking used by individuals visiting offshore communities, such as Gabriola, Newcastle, and Protection Islands. Lions Bay is very limited for available parking space due to the topography of the area. Kelowna and Whistler both have specific RV and oversized vehicle rates, and only one municipality reviewed had a 24-hour rate, so the South Vancouver Island ferry terminals were surveyed for their 24-hour rates. In reviewing each community's parking rates, the District of Tofino was found to be below the average across the board. Specifically, the district's 12-hour day rates were found to be less than half the average price. It's proposed to increase by 100% to $10, still below the average of $11.25. This rate fluctuated from $4 per day to $32 per day, depending on which municipality was researched. When researching other municipalities, Victoria, Whistler, and Lions Bay were found to prohibit night parking within paid lots, and only Nanaimo had a specific 24-hour parking rate. As such, district staff conducted a review of parking rates at Duke Point, Departure Bay, and Swartz Bay and found they set a rate of $12.50 for a 24-hour period, so we have proposed to change our rate to match that. Finally, RV rates are proposed to increase by 33% from $15 per day to $20 per day as a reflection of Whistler and Kelowna's oversized vehicle parking rates. A new rate, RV Park 4 hours at $12, is proposed in addition to our flat day rate to increase turnover in the RV lot, increasing overall revenue. This rate is consistent with Whistler and Kelowna's oversized vehicle hourly parking rates. Based on the number of customers received in 2019 and the types of parking purchased, the proposed change in fees for paid parking would increase revenue by approximately $46,000 annually. As the proposed 12-hour rate would not offer the same savings, sale counts were adjusted to redistribute some of the 12-hour sales into other rate categories. Additionally, we suspect the introduction of our RV Park 4 hours would reduce the number of RVs incorrectly using the standard size vehicle car rates and result in some sales being pulled from the RV day rate. And I have an outline of just how I did some of that on the side here. Staff is proposing an effective date of May 1st, 2020. If bylaw 109106 is adopted, the date of final adoption will be April 14th, 2020. The effective date proposed will grant the third-party provider, Robbins Parking, time to program the new rates into the pay parking system. The new rates will be displayed at the parking kiosk and added to the District of Tofino's website, District of Tofino website's parking page for May 1st, 2020 for a public audience. Based on the parking rate review from communities on both Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland, the proposed rate increases would allow for an increase to the annual pay parking revenue and still remain below the average of the communities that were reviewed. Thanks for listening, and I welcome any questions and comments.
Thanks very much, Kira.
You're welcome.
Anyone have questions for Kira? Or comments about the proposed new rate structure? Go ahead, Councillor Law.
I just wanted to say good job.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
With a comparison with the other communities on the parking, did they have free parking in the off season?
A number of them did, yes.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I tend to think that we should have paid parking all year round. I think during the winter, there's certainly enough parking on the streets for the locals, and I'm quite happy to charge RVs if they want to park downtown.
Just a piece of information relating to that is that historically, the off-season, part of the rules for the off-season have allowed individuals with offshore parking permits to park in the paid lots for free. And that's part of the RV parking program. So that would be something that would have to be changed.
Well, I've been to see what other people think about this.
Anyone else? I'll call on someone if they don't. Councillor Anderson, is that you?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was happy with the report and the research that was done. I would prefer if we move towards no parking for RVs in town at some point. And I'm hoping that the revenues are going towards the shuttle and supporting other means of transportation to keep RVs out of town. That was my only thought on it. I not really. I hadn't thought about moving towards pay parking in the off season, so I don't really have any comment on that without giving it a little more thought. That's all.
Thank you.
Your Worship, if I may comment on pay parking year round. As council knows, my office window looks out at that parking lot, and even when it's free in the winter, that lot can be pretty empty. So I'm not sure there would be much to gain financially by charging for parking there, and it would probably chase away the few vehicles that do park there if there was a charge for it, in my estimation anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, I think obviously we have a bit of uncertainty introduced this year and potentially next year and a couple of years after, as we get to see what our visitation rates are like. And although I support very much moving our parking prices up to something that's a bit more comparable, I think we're ready for that. We've introduced pay parking in those lots in a way that's been pretty palatable for most people, I think. And that, you know, introducing a rate increase this year when our visitation might be quite a bit lower will help to balance out our revenues a little bit. And I support that. So I think it's good to go from my perspective. Anyone else? All right, if no more comment, then maybe we can turn our minds to the motion before us.
Sure. I'll move that the District of Tofino Traffic and Parking Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 1091.06/2020, dated April 14th, 2020, be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. So moved and seconded, first to third reading. Any final comment on that or questions? Okay. Is anybody opposed to first, second, and third reading? Seeing none, everyone is in favor. And the motion is carried. Thank you. And then the adoption.
Move that the District of Tofino Traffic and Parking Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 1091.06/2020 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final comment? Question? All right. Is anybody opposed to the adoption of the bylaw? Hearing none. Everyone in favor of adoption of the bylaw? And the motion is carried. Thank you. All right. And now moving into our next staff report. So this is regarding a COVID-19 community resiliency and recovery process, planning process. So I think this is going over to Aaron.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I just should let everybody know that I've been getting a message most of this afternoon that my internet connection is unstable. So if you lose me for a second, just wave at me, or it seems to come back about after 5 seconds. So just a heads up. Okay, let's get this. Okay, everybody can see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. So this report today presents a number of recommendations. The first is the development of a plan, or recovery and resiliency plan for the COVID-19 pandemic. It also recommends the appointment of a committee to oversee that planning work, and also the assignment of some staff to the project itself. Again, I think we're all familiar with where we are, but it's a recovery plan in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Recovery is an action that should start occurring during response actions and well before response is actually finished. In this case, recovery, and without putting too fine a point on it yet, will be some understanding what the community's needs are and what type of resources we may be able to help provide, or at least direct people to. Coordination for the entire community on all the different sectors, and in the end, and finally, a leadership role. The project, or the plan, is a framework from recovery. I've tripped over the word plan a couple of times in writing the report and thinking about this. I feel that as much as a plan, this is going to be planning and a process and a framework. So the action of actually creating the plan will be in large part that should give us the benefit of it. Our plan will be focused on social resiliency and economic recovery primarily, and that can expand as well. But so far, it seems to be where we'll be sitting at. And its intent is to also mitigate any long-term impacts to our community as a result of the pandemic. In terms of financial impacts, there'll be staff time associated with the project. We think there may be opportunities for support through EMBC and the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture. Recovery itself is addressed under BSEMS, the British Columbia Emergency Management System, where recovery is identified as a critical function of emergency planning. In fact, we're looking at developing a templated plan this year in the 2020 budget for recovery plan. So we're sort of jumped ahead a number of years quite quickly. The plan recovery in this case will be fairly broad-based, covering multiple sectors and all aspects of the community. We as a district will be a coordinating body, and we're going to draw our authorities to develop this type of plan through the Emergency Program Act and the Community Charter. The plan itself will be primarily based on community recovery. There will be a small portion for business continuity for the District of Tofino. This is work that staff has already been undertaking for at least a month now, but we may want to take a look at it now that we're a month into the pandemic. We're going to develop it in reference to provincial guidelines and resources, best practices. I spent some time on the weekend researching our recovery plans all over the world. They're interesting and different. I'm excited to get working on a plan for our community. I think communication will be a key aspect of this planning process. The networks, making sure the organizations are connected and we're connecting as a region will be very important. And again, the district's main function is going to be the coordinating body between sectors, the facilitator, or as a convener. The committee, in front of council today, I won't read this whole list, was generated through some discussions with staff as well as with some of these organizations in front of us. The committee structure and its size are something that I still feel may not be exactly where we want to end up today. I get torn between forming a committee that's so large that we can't actually do the work we need to do, but a committee too small that doesn't give us the representation that we need. So I'm happy to talk through that aspect of the plan. It may be that we have a broad committee that has subsectors, such as with the Chamber of Commerce working with their business roundtables specifically to restaurants or specifically to resorts or adventure tourism or something like that. Again, I think, as I said earlier, a lot of this will be communication and coordination to filter the information up to the committee and then back down through the community. There may be some actions required during the planning process. An example of this was the district working with the Tofino Co-op to help develop a plan for the co-op during the initial response to the pandemic, as well as recent conversations we've had with the Chamber of Commerce. In an emergency action, and we are still in an emergency response phase, it's important to act where we can to limit the amount of suffering or damage being done to our community. And so in some instances, actions may be required prior to the finalization of the plan. Finally, we want to think about this regionally as well. We work under the Emergency Management Act, and we have responsibility for the District of Tofino. That being said, I think we all appreciate the importance of the West Coast coming back as a region together at the same time. And so to that end, I have contacted Coast Salish, who seem to be very interested, and I've reached out to Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations. And following today's meeting, we'll be reaching out to the other governments in our region. Again, we may all have separate plans, but it would be, I think, beneficial to us all to walk together down this path. And that's my questions and comments. I will say that I am more nervous doing this by Zoom than I am in person. My hand was actually shaking as I was talking. So.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, it is strange to be all hearing ourselves talk in our own private rooms and then together visually and seeing each other's faces. So I thank you. You did a great job, and everybody's doing a great job so far, and we're getting used to it. So I think this is an opportunity for us to have some discussion and some questions, and putting a little thought of this obviously before coming to the meeting today. From the outset, I did want to say that this is an incredibly important process. And Aaron, I couldn't agree with you more in saying that it's the active verb part of it, the planning, and the process that we undertake that will be just as important than any documentation that comes out the other end. And that this is something none of us has ever experienced before. And when we look at some of the guiding documents that are provided by the province, we can see quite quickly that a lot of it is really based on experiences to do with disasters and like flood and fire, where property is destroyed, but it's not the public health emergency that we're experiencing now. So some of this is a lot of this is all very new to us, and it's important for us, I think, to have some patience with each other and with ourselves as we discuss the best way to go about this. At the same time, it's really important, I think, that we launch a process like this as fully and completely and thoughtfully as we can. And to that end, you've already introduced a couple of points of uncertainty about thinking about, the structure of the committee, for example, and its size. And we may not land on things today. And I think that's okay. That we have the opportunity to either bring this back in 2 weeks at our next regular council meeting, or if we needed to, because we felt more urgency to sort of get started even earlier, to come back to a special council meeting that we could convene within the next week or so. So I don't want anybody to feel like all of the answers need to be here today. And what we do need to leave this conversation with, I think, is a really good listing of the questions that we may all have. And then it gives us some time to process, and Aaron, for you to potentially work on a new iteration of the terms of reference, for example. So I really appreciate that this is coming quickly. I did a really quick survey of some of my colleagues, mayor colleagues from around BC, to see where their municipalities were at. And once again, Tofino's on the leading edge, and there are a few places that have put their minds to recovery committees or task forces, but very, very few. So there you go. I would like to open it up to council and get a sense of questions that people had after reading all these materials, initial responses that you had, thoughts. Would anyone like to lead us off?
I'm happy to go first.
Thank you, Councillor McQuaid.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for this report, and I have spoken with a number of community members who, you know, we had a list of letters on our council agenda meeting package this morning that pointed us to concerns about, you know, finances, about recovery, and I didn't say it at the time, but I am grateful that we have a community that in the midst of disaster is forward thinking enough to be writing council letters and asking for things like resiliency plans. And I'm also grateful that we have a staff that turns their minds to them so quickly. One of the things that occurred to me while I was reading this plan and thinking about the ways in which our community has been dealing with this situation is that the ways in which our community strained immediately were, or further, which were ways in which we were hearing our community talk about the strain at this election. We heard lots of concerns from our community about housing, business resiliency, hospital, mental health, physical health, the inequity in our tourism benefits, and economic diversity. Those were all topics of concern far prior to this event, and they are definitely ways in which we are watching our community kind of bend, break, or strain right now. So as we start, like for me, as we start to think about recovery and resiliency, it's important to me that we frame this in a manner that it's not just a response to COVID, and that this is a resiliency and response to how to create a better community that withstands any of the things that we're facing. And I really do strongly believe that while all the chips are kind of in the air right now, we have a really unique opportunity to guide the way in which they're going to come down for our community, and perhaps in a more equitable and resilient manner. And that leads me to believe that if this is an all-inclusive, really all-encompassing look at the ways in which we can strengthen our community, specifically along the lines that we strained and broke first, that this might want to be guided in part by the revamp of our strategic plan that we were looking at as a council. We have had that on the books. And I think that if we are really going to incorporate this meaningfully, not just as a plan that we hold in this period of recovery, but that we hold as a community, as a way in which we would like to strengthen ourselves as a whole, then embedding that in deeper into a document like a strategic plan for this council would be something that I would be really very much interested in. So that's my first kind of thoughts about this. But I'm just so grateful to be reading something concrete and that we're moving towards these discussions already. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chalmers.
I have to actually thank Councillor McQuaid because I've been trying to figure out how to word something I felt about the report, and I think you hit the nail on it with regards to the strategic plan. And over the last few years, all of the ESS training I've been doing, we're always looking at earthquakes and tsunamis, and a lot of the report was taken off of, as Mayor Osborne said, fires and all these physical things that you could point to first and then go on further on to the economic. But I think really looking at it from that socio-economic and looking at how I think every single one of us has experienced trauma emotionally through this, through the change in our lives, and how that greater picture is affecting us. And how do we even come up with that framework, because it is quite obscure. So exactly what Councillor McQuaid said about looking at our strategic planning to incorporate into this, I think helps guide that.
Thank you.
That's my first thoughts.
I guess I'll say a few words. Thank you, Mayor and Councillors McQuaid and Chalmers. There's not much more to add, really. I really echo the sentiments. I'm really grateful for staff and for their timely action in moving towards this this planning process. And I think it's what the community really needs right now from the district, is to have some sort of well, not just hope, but action. And so I hope we can move on this in a timely way, and I hope we get really good participation from community members on the committee. I'm in full support of moving ahead on this, and I'd like to echo Councillor McQuaid's statements about how this really fits in for long-term planning around sustainability, around economy, around resilience, and in all sorts of ways. And I think we were striving towards that on our economic development committee the CDAC committee that we were all, both McQuaid and myself, and of course Councillor Baird, were working towards. So I'm hoping that it sort of is focused in the short term on this recovery from COVID, and monitoring how we can move ahead, and coming up with good planning. Also, the support of the social structures in our community. So yeah, but I'm kind of hope in the long term it can keep up some work around resiliency, maybe diversification. We really feel in our community now what a lot of other communities must have felt in different sorts of disasters, in different collapses of economies that have happened in communities around the province and everywhere. So thank you for your timely work, and I'm in full support of moving ahead.
Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Aaron, thanks for all your work. I think it's really timely, topical. I think we all see it as very necessary. I do think that the next couple of weeks, a week or two, the mayor and council will learn a little bit more about our role in the policy group. And I think that's what I'm hearing from council. Certainly my own feelings are that this really does, as Councillor McQuaid says, merge into strategic planning. And so I'd like to see mayor and council have a very strong role, as the BC EMS sort of points out through the policy group role, in really looking at this and making sure it's thoroughly and thoughtfully and carefully planned as we can do. But I do applaud it. I think we're definitely ahead of the game, and it's I kind of look at it as a really important opportunity to reimagine Tofino in some ways, and broaden our vision for the future.
Councillor Steer, did I see your hand there?
Yes, thank you, and I won't. I'll just echo everything that's been said, and just thank you, Councillor McQuaid, for framing it in the way that I have in my notes here as well, and that if we can take this opportunity, as everyone has spoken about, and move forward on this, and then specifically around the structure, where we have an inclusive group to participate in this, but that it's a group that is a workable group, that we don't lose sight that this will be a strong, that we need a strong group of people to move forward, but we need it to also be a very workable group as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McMaster?
Yeah, I'd echo what's been said previously. When I first read the report and I saw the word recovery, my first thought was, do we want to recover to what we used to be, or do we want to recover to something possibly better? And my other thought is this has got to be a proactive group. I'd hate to see a lot of arm waving and then still waving our arms when and if another disaster comes. So it's got to be proactive and things have to happen quickly.
Thank you. A couple questions I wanted to maybe just talk through a little bit, especially when it comes to the structure and size of a select committee. I think that our experience with CDAC taught us a lot. And I don't need to remind you that we ended the CDAC in part because I think there was some wheel spinning that was created by a large committee. And I'm not convinced that the size being proposed is really that workable. And I just wanted to explore a little bit that tension between a small, nimble, flexible, action-oriented committee that can guide a process that involves other participants, perhaps in roundtables or subcommittees or some other kind of way to involve other parts of our community. I find the representation as proposed to be understandably heavy on the health, social service, and business side of things. But I think it's missing if we are asking the question, recover to what? And if we are really asking the question about resiliency and how do we build a stronger, more resilient community that is able to better withstand this type of event again, because it will happen. What other parts of our community do we need to hear from in this planning process and how do they plug into it? So I'm thinking about the arts and culture sector, that creative sector. I'm thinking about youth. I'm thinking about the environment. I'm thinking about First Nations, and I recognize that Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations is listed there, but I think that we have an opportunity here to build in a stronger foundation of principles of reconciliation, and that if ever there was an opportunity to have a discussion, a wide discussion with our community around recovering to something that is, as Councillor McQuaid put it, more equitable, this is an opportunity that we have to seize. At the same time, I also know that we have to take quick action, especially around parts of our economic recovery, but not at the expense of the social side and the public health side. And I anticipate some very difficult discussions coming soon about when and how the region reopens to our predominant industry, tourism, in a way that is appropriate for the most vulnerable people in the region. And I don't know that there are going to be compatible goals here immediately, and we're going to have some tough times talking about that. So I'm asking myself, how do we structure and populate a committee that is made of individuals who are forward-thinking, thoughtful, optimistic, team players, able to show up at meetings and get some of this work going, and balancing that against asking 8 or 10 organizations to please that they appoint the people. And I want to talk a little bit about the recruitment process and the selection process and what's the best way to populate that committee. So I will stop there maybe and just invite some comment, and Aaron, please jump in around balancing, trading off size versus we'd love to have everybody represented here, but it might not be possible to do in one committee. And maybe let me just add one more thing, sorry, but I also want to just point out that I think I'm not comfortable with having only one member of council on this, and I do understand that this is a committee that's providing advice to council, but if ever there's a time to involve up to 3 members of council, I think because of the fulsomeness of listening to the discussion and the thought processes that have to go on, and the way that comes back to the fuller council of 7 people, I really feel quite strongly that there needs to be more than one member of council there. So I will now stop. Aaron, do you have anything you want to jump in with right away before we open it up again?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. It's a great discussion, and something that I'd probably want to sit down and talk to the management team about, and Bob and Elise in particular, to sort of put our thoughts together. It's so I think I'll just leave it at that. I think that Bob's got his camera on, so I'm going to mute myself.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Your Worship. I was just looking up the definition of a wicked problem. It actually is a problem in planning and policy. Or it's a term in planning and policy that I look at occasionally, for something like this, and it's in planning and policy, a wicked problem is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. And I think that where we're headed over the next while is really trying to address what I think by that definition is a wicked problem. The discussion that we've heard from council today, in the last few weeks, we've been struggling with what to do with our strategic plan, with how much the world has changed over the last 6 weeks. And the idea that maybe we merge a strategic plan with a recovery response to this pandemic is certainly an intriguing one. And maybe that's something that you could get us as staff to go away and do a little bit more thinking on as to how we can get that process, how we can get a process going. And it is going to be, I think, a process and a framework a lot more than a 24-page plan with a nice cover. I don't know that I have a lot more to add other than I think what council has done is given us some good things to think about and to get back to you on. This is going to be a very, very challenging one for all of us. I think that we probably didn't hit the mark here, and that's okay. There was absolutely no template to work from that as a starting point, and thanks to Aaron and Elise for the work they have put in on this. But I think we can take some of the ideas generated here today and get back to you.
Thank you. Councillor McQuaid, was that your hand?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you had mentioned, Mayor Osborne, and now one that we heard from CEO McPherson. And I really, while I understand the gravity of the situation that we're in and the wicked problem that we are facing, I don't think that any of the problems that we've encountered in this, we wouldn't have encountered at a later date and far disparate from each other. I think that if anything, this situation has just accelerated and arrived us at a terminal point for a number of these problems altogether, which I think is actually a really amazing opportunity for council and for this community. And one of the things that I can't help but see when I'm looking at the list of proposed membership of this committee, and the beauty of living in a small community, is that I know a number of people that would fulfill 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 of those requirements at a time. And while I understand the difficulty of representing perhaps maybe the Resource Society and the Family Coalition, I do think that if we're looking at maintaining a smaller but more concentrated committee, there are people on there that could wear more than one hat and represent more than one organization, and I think do so quite effectively. So I think looking at that kind of critically would be really helpful as well. What else did I have here? Aaron, you do make mention in this report, and I do know that in recovery, this is sometimes the case, that there are negative consequences to assistance. And I was wondering if you had in particular highlighted any or thought of any critical to this community that we might be able to think of now or in this committee to address.
Yes, thanks for the question. I haven't spent any time thinking about that specific question. I did note it while I was writing in my review of the presentation today. I think that's the type of work that I would expect to happen quite soon, before we start taking any actions that we're understanding we're not being more harmful than not. Again, I think as it's been described, this is a framework that's been used for fire and flood primarily, and so what that means in terms of pandemic may be a little bit harder to determine, or at least is for me at this time.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I think more than any other issue that council has addressed. I mean, this is the largest maybe the world has addressed, but it's really important to get it right and not to just be spinning our wheels with a committee just to try and show that we're doing something. So I think in comparing it again to CDAC, CDAC developed good plans and a work plan to move ahead, but came up with no resources and no expertise to carry out that plan. And I think the same thing happened with the Tofino Housing Corporation until it hired somebody. So I think it's important that we recognize that if it's going to be effective, it's going to take dedicated people on it with some expertise in the field. So I'm it's no time to be hiring people, of course. I think the community has no appetite for that. But we do have to recognize if we move ahead, it's going to take more than the input of the community and the development of a plan. We're going to have to figure out what kind of resources it's going to take to move stuff ahead that gets planned. So I just wanted to point out that I think that was another failing that we can learn from at the CDAC committee and possibly the old Tofino Housing Corporation. That if we are going to move ahead and be effective and get it right, we're going to have to recognize that it's going to take resources as well. That's all.
Thank you. And I think this committee is resourced in a way that CDAC certainly never was, and that is the heavy duty staff involvement, which is a big part of it. One thing that occurs to me, I mean, I've looked at those couple of municipalities that are getting going on task forces or recovery committees. Their approaches are quite different, and it makes me wonder if is there a way to structure something we immediately do need to begin convening certain parts of our community together to have some of these difficult conversations about how to best respond and what the very initial pivot points are that we need to make so that we can enable a quality of life and a basic economic level of activity in a way that sustains the community and the municipality. So just the bare essentials. And that will naturally perhaps morph into some of these bigger wicked problem issues that we're discussing. And this is a committee that it'll start off as a response to the pandemic, or it's a recovery plan that starts off as an initial response to the pandemic, but I think can lead into a much more deeper and very meaningful process for the community that gives us, it's almost like a pressure valve that helps to relieve some of the tension that I think we really felt in the last couple of years in our tourism industry. And leading into the municipal election, it was very evident that our community was beginning to have some very difficult conversations around concepts behind over-tourism or sustainable tourism or restorative tourism, and that the pandemic has given us this pause, this breathing space that even in some of the most economically challenging times many of us have ever faced, people are they're getting back in touch with why they moved here in the first place and what it is that truly brought those of us from away here. And I think there's something very beautiful in that needs to be allowed to blossom and flourish in this kind of a process. But I don't think that we'll get it right at the very beginning in trying to structure a committee to talk about that. So I want to be clear that we allow ourselves enough flexibility to allow that kind of development and growth inside a process, and that even a very short-term recovery committee can get an initial plan together, and then it morphs and changes and moves on into something else that deals with a lot of these other bigger problems that we've been facing and need to talk about as a community. So, and again, I do think that initial response is going to be something that's probably achieved by a smaller group of individuals. And so to Councillor McQuaid's point, it probably is a way of looking at the membership of the committee where we could incorporate quite a few different perspectives with maybe a smaller number of individuals. So that is something, maybe we could kind of sit on that a little bit for a week or so and discuss again. Aaron?
I think those are great points. We've had initial conversations with the Chamber of Commerce to that end, to, you know, even prior to getting this plan moving, is developing a survey, gathering some data, trying to put together that needs and resources while we're still in response. Recovery could take us, realistically, as you said, 5 years. I mean, we're probably going to be in it heavily for the next 18 months. But initially, what we're facing right behind the pandemic is economic uncertainty, disaster for a lot. And so, as I talked about earlier in the presentation, the idea of actions occurring as we're still working on this long-term reset or mitigation, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I mean, some immediate actions to help deal with and reduce the uncertainty, to achieve some stability, to provide us the stability that we need to have those other conversations. And, you know, I just have to say that the one thing that just keeps going through my head over and over and over is recovery to what? And that we're not going to define what is for months, but we need to have some basic certainties and basic needs met in order to be able to have those conversations. And so that's the basic stuff of being able to shelter and house, feed people, know that there's enough stability in individuals' lives, enough social connection, enough financial stability to be able to really dig into that. Recovery to what? Are we going back to where we were before? Because there's not one person I've spoken to that wants to return to exactly the way we used to be. And I think it's important for us to all kind of hold that question in our heads. Now I'm just getting super philosophical, so I'll just shut up.
If I could, I don't think that's philosophical at all. I think it's really practical. I think without immediate responses that address the type of things that you're pointing at, food, shelter, and, you know, a plan in place, something to aim at, we run the risk of losing the voices that we need in a plan that will aim at a more equitable recovery. So those small changes that we can make now will allow us to retain those people and allow us to incorporate those voices in any type of recovery plan that we're aiming at. Like, I think that's really important and very practical.
So now I'm going to look at Aaron and Bob and ask you what you're thinking. How would you suggest we move forward?
Yeah, thanks. Again, I think that we need to circle back and bring council a little bit more of a defined work plan based on what we've heard here. And, you know, honestly, it may or may not be a select committee of council. It might be something else entirely. I've very much heard the concerns, and I think all of council has heard from me in the past about, you know, if you want to get nothing done, get an 18-person committee. So want to talk with our management team as soon as tomorrow about can we break this into some bite-sized chunks and get folks focused on specific actions. And one of the early things it seems to me that we want to do is define what that what is, or begin working on what that what is when I've heard councillors say recover to what. Right. We spend a lot of time in OCPs and in comprehensive sustainability plans talking about what our future is, but really here's a time to say, okay, well, we've got somewhat of a blank slate. let's start. Let's go back to kind of first principles and what's important to this community, and then start backcasting to some of the steps we need to take to get there. So I don't know that there's, you know, unless there's something that hasn't been said, I don't know that there's a lot more that we can do today. Aaron and I think, have both been taking notes, and the folks who have their cameras turned off hopefully have been taking lots of notes about you know, what we're hearing from council, which I have to say, when I first started thinking about a recovery plan, this is very different than what I thought was going to be, what was going to be important, and that's cool. But I kind of need to go away and work with the team and maybe come back with a different approach.
Well, a wise person said to me very recently that if we take the same people and do things the same way, we get the same results. So I'm sure there's a lesson in there for ourselves. And also, you know, the other thing I've commented about this on the radio a couple of times and talked to a few of you and a few people about this, but I'm very much taken back to the 80s and 90s when this community, this region, went through a hugely transformative process where instead of the world thrusting something upon us that we had no control over, we really seized an opportunity to take control and shift the future direction of this community, and made the choice to leave certain kinds of industries and engage in tourism. So it is not that we haven't been here before in some senses. And that gives me a lot of hope that and I know that there are a lot of very creative people here in this community who care very deeply about it. And while there are different people living here than there were 30 years ago, some of them are the same, and they've been through this before. So there's a lot of wisdom, I think, in our community that we can harvest literally quite, and ask for their participation and guidance. And I have a lot of faith, actually, that we're going to be able to figure something out in a way of moving forward that really keeps us in a place that we all want to be and live and have a high quality of life and a more equitable economy for the region's residents. So thank you very much, Aaron. If you had not put this before us today, we wouldn't have even been able to have this discussion. And I think that's very, very important. So there's no regret, I think. And I know you put a tremendous amount of work into this, and yeah, maybe it's going to look different or quite different, but in the end, we wouldn't be here if we hadn't started it. So thank you. Any other thoughts before we carry on? No? Okay. Then we shall shift gears and move into something easy to do. And that is receive the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes from March 16th.
Move receipt.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Were there any questions or comments from that? Nope. Okay. All in favor of receiving the minutes? See, can see everybody's hands now. Thank you very much. Motion carried. And then we have the District of Tofino Election Procedures Amendment Bylaw 1204.01 for adoption. So this is something we had already discussed and passed the first 3 readings. Did anybody have any questions about this? Did staff have any comments you wanted to make? I doubt it. Okay. All right, then would somebody move adoption?
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final question or comment? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the bylaw? Yes, that's everybody. Thank you very much. The motion is carried. And that is it. This brings us to the end of our first online meeting. And the sun is just about to come pouring right into my face, so it's a really good idea, good timing to end this. Thank you to everybody for the way this went. It worked quite smoothly, I think. I look forward to any feedback that members of the public who are watching, if you want to send us an email to let us know what the experience was like for you, we'd be grateful to get your feedback as well. If you have any questions from the meeting today, I'm sorry that we haven't figured out the public input part of this online. We will work on that. But if you do have any questions or comments from today's meeting, then we're also very grateful. We'd be very grateful to receive that, and you can send it to corporateservices@tofino.ca. So with that, how about a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. The meeting is adjourned, and thank you everybody for this.
Goodbye, everyone out there.
Could council stay on for just a moment? I'd love to get your feedback on this first meeting.
Sure.
Just for a few minutes.
You bet. Okay.
But Andrew Bailey can't ask any questions.
Gonna have to email.